It was a slow Tuesday morning on Route 89, just outside of a sleepy desert town in Arizona. Two local deputies, Officer Granger and Officer Mills, sat in their cruiser parked on the shoulder, sipping stale coffee and watching the dusty highway for something, anything, to break the monotony. That's when they saw it, an old, beat-up truck rattling toward them. The paint was faded, the muffler barely hanging on, and the windows dusty enough to obscure the driver. It looked like it belonged in a scrapyard, not on a state highway. Granger tossed his cup out the window and flicked on the lights. "Let's check it out," he muttered. "No tags on the back. Could be stolen." The truck pulled over without resistance. The driver's door creaked open, and an elderly man stepped out, black, gray-bearded, wearing a worn field jacket and heavy boots. He didn't look nervous. He didn't even look surprised. "License and registration," Granger barked before the man could say a word. The old man calmly handed them a leather folder. Granger barely glanced at it before handing it back. "This is expired," Mills said flatly. "And this truck doesn't match the plates. Step to the back, sir." The old man did exactly as told. No arguing. No resistance. But something in his calmness irritated them. "You live around here?" Mills asked, eyeing the patches on the jacket. They were faded, but one clearly showed a bald eagle holding arrows. "Military. Visiting an old friend," the man replied. Granger looked over at Mills. "We're gonna have to impound this. You got a tow truck on call?" "Already radioed it in." The old man stood quietly beside the cruiser while they searched the truck. There was no contraband. Just a duffel bag, some camping gear, and a weathered photo album. "Sir, we're going to have to take you in for further questioning," Granger said. Still no argument. Just a nod. But 1 hour later, the entire situation changed, dramatically. Exactly 58 minutes after the truck was pulled over, a black SUV rolled onto the scene. It was sleek, spotless, and moved with the kind of presence that made heads turn. It didn't belong out here in the dust and gravel, but it didn't care. The deputies were still standing beside the old man when the SUV came to a stop behind their cruiser. Its engine idled low and steady, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. Out stepped a tall man in a tailored uniform, decorated with rows of medals and insignia. His posture was perfect, his gaze sharp and unblinking. On each shoulder shined a gleaming 4-star rank. Officer Mills blinked. "Is that, military?" "Looks like a general," Granger muttered, straightening up instinctively. The man didn't waste time. He approached calmly, but with unmistakable authority. When he reached the two officers, he removed his sunglasses. "I'm General Randall M. Harlan, United States Army," he said. "You have a serious problem here." The deputies glanced at each other, visibly unsettled. "I was informed that a decorated combat veteran was pulled over, detained, and disrespected for driving his personal vehicle, on his way to meet me." Granger swallowed hard. "Sir, we were just following procedure. His ID was expired, and, that man," General Harlan said, pointing firmly at the elderly driver, "served this country for 42 years. He led troops through 4 tours. The Pentagon still consults him for strategy. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Do you even know what that means?" The old man stood silent, arms folded, eyes fixed on the ground like he'd seen this kind of thing 100 times. Granger tried to salvage it. "Sir, we didn't mean any disrespect. You didn't ask who he was. You didn't listen. You saw an old truck and made a snap judgment. That's not protocol. That's assumption." The general stepped closer. "And now, you're about to find out exactly who you tried to humiliate." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut through. Officer Mills took a cautious step forward, his voice lowering. "General Harlan, with all due respect, we were just trying to enforce state law. If we overstepped, we apologize. But we didn't know who he was. That's the point, Harlan snapped, voice clipped and sharp. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with dignity. Behind him, the rear door of the SUV opened. A younger soldier in dress blues stepped out, holding a black briefcase. Without saying a word, he handed it to General Harlan. The general opened it, revealing a set of documents in sealed plastic sleeves, a silver-plated military ID, and a photo of the old man in full combat gear, younger, but unmistakably the same face. He looked fierce in the photo, medals on his chest, standing beside a former U.S. president. This is Command Sergeant Major Elijah Ward, Harlan said firmly. You just held him on the side of the road like some vagrant. You rifled through his belongings. You searched his truck without probable cause. That photo album you tossed around? It contains personal letters from soldiers who never made it back. Mills looked visibly rattled now. Sir, we didn't know, you didn't care to know. Sergeant Major Ward finally spoke, voice calm but cutting. I've seen this before. I let you go on because I wanted to see how far you'd take it. He stepped toward the two deputies. You were ready to haul me into town, maybe worse. And for what? Because my tags looked a little off and I drive an old truck. Let me tell you something, nothing about me is broken. That truck ran better than your entire department's fleet. The silence that followed was brutal. No one dared interrupt. General Harlan turned to the soldier still standing by the SUV. Call the governor's office. I want this incident on record. And I want a response before sundown. The soldier gave a quick salute and returned to the vehicle. Granger's face had turned pale. Wait, you're escalating this? You think actions don't have consequences, the general replied. You stopped the wrong man today. Officer Granger's voice cracked under the pressure. Sir, please. We didn't mean for this to go so far. General Harlan didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His tone carried the weight of accountability. You're sworn to protect. That includes knowing when you're wrong, and owning it without excuses. If Sergeant Major Ward had been someone else, someone without connections, you'd have run his name, impounded his vehicle, and tossed him in a holding cell without a second thought. Mills looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. We were just doing our job. No, Ward interrupted. You were doing what you thought you could get away with. He stepped forward again, slowly this time, and looked both deputies in the eye. I've led missions in places where everything was chaos. I've had to make snap decisions that meant life or death. You want to talk about judgment? About responsibility? You don't judge a man by the dirt on his boots or the rust on his bumper. You judge him by how he treats others when nobody's watching. The general nodded to the soldier in the SUV. A satellite phone was already pressed to the aide's ear. He's speaking to the governor's office now, Harlan said calmly. This isn't about revenge. It's about setting a precedent. What you did today isn't just about Sergeant Major Ward, it's about every citizen you could have treated the same way. The wind kicked up dust between them. Not a word from either deputy. Then, General Harlan turned to Ward. Would you like to press formal charges? Ward paused. For a long moment, he stared at the highway, as if weighing years of memories. No, he said finally. But I want them to learn. I want them to stand in front of their department and explain exactly what happened here. And I want it documented, not buried. Harlan nodded. That can be arranged. Then he turned back to the deputies. You'll be hearing from Internal Affairs. And if you're lucky, this'll become a lesson, not a resignation letter. The black SUV door opened again. Time to go, Harlan said to Ward. As the general and the sergeant climbed into the vehicle, Officer Granger stepped forward and called out. Sir, wait. Ward turned his head slightly. I didn't know who you were, Granger said, voice quiet. But I do now. And I'm sorry. Ward stared for a moment and nodded once. "Don't apologize to me. Just do better." And with that, the SUV rolled away, kicking up dust that lingered longer than the sound of their regret. The black SUV disappeared down the highway, its tires leaving clean tracks through the desert grit. Officers Granger and Mills stood motionless, still staring after it long after it was gone. No more words. Just silence, and the weight of what had just happened. Back at the station, word spread fast. The shift supervisor called them in immediately. The dashcam footage had already been requested by the governor's office. The sheriff's tone was ice-cold. "You two pulled over a living legend," he said. "And instead of recognizing a man who gave more to this country than either of you ever will, you treated him like a suspect on sight. This isn't just bad optics. This is a leadership failure. A human failure." Internal Affairs launched a review within hours. Both officers were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But the true punishment came before any formal action, when they were ordered to stand before the department, and recount every detail of the stop. No embellishments. No justifications. Just the truth. As they spoke, awkward, ashamed, and visibly humbled, the room fell quiet. What started as humiliation became something deeper, a shift in perspective. Across the room, newer recruits listened closely. Seasoned officers watched with narrowed eyes, processing the fallout. And somewhere in the crowd, a young cadet leaned over and whispered to her partner, "That won't be us. We'll ask first. We'll listen." The story of what happened on Route 89 didn't disappear. It was passed on in training sessions. It was written about in departmental bulletins. It even reached military forums, where veterans who knew Sergeant Major Elijah Ward shared their own stories of his leadership, bravery, and humility. As for Ward himself, he never said another word about it publicly. But he did get a call weeks later from a young officer who wasn't involved in the stop. "Sir," she said nervously. "I wasn't there that day. But I watched what happened. And I want to thank you, for teaching us, even when you didn't have to." There was a pause. Then came Ward's calm reply, "Learning starts where ego ends." Click. The line went dead. But the lesson stayed alive. Weeks turned into months. Sergeant Major Elijah Ward returned to his quiet life off the grid, somewhere near the mountains where cell service faded and the only sounds were birds, wind, and the occasional hum of that old truck, still running, still reliable. He rarely spoke of the incident again. He didn't need to. The country had already done the talking for him. One day, a small package arrived at his mailbox. No return address. Inside, a letter handwritten on plain stationery, *, "Sir, I was one of the officers at the scene that day. I've since completed mandatory retraining and have taken it on myself to mentor every new recruit we bring in. You didn't demand punishment. You asked for growth. I'm trying to live up to that." Asterisk at the bottom, just an initial. M. Ward folded the letter carefully and slid it into the photo album the officers had once tossed aside. Right next to the photo of him standing in his prime beside his unit, and beside the president. A knock came at the door later that week. When he opened it, a young woman stood on the porch. Civilian clothes, but unmistakable posture. Military. A backpack slung over one shoulder. "Sir," she said, nodding. "General Harlan said if I wanted to learn how to lead, really lead, I had to find you." He looked her over once, not unkindly, but with the weight of experience. "Hope you're not afraid of dust and early mornings," Ward said. She smiled. "Not even a little." And just like that, the next chapter began, not with fury or outrage, but with quiet strength and the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Out on the road, cars kept speeding past mile marker 117 on Route 89, never knowing what kind of lesson had once unfolded in the dirt right there. But those who mattered. They remembered. A year had passed. The incident with Sergeant Major Ward had become more than a cautionary tale, it became case study material. Police academies across the country began using the footage from the dashcam as part of their training modules under a new section titled Implicit Judgment Professional Conduct. It wasn't just about law, it was about perception, humility, and listening before assuming. At Fort Bragg, a bronze plaque was unveiled during a leadership summit. It didn't boast of medals or battles. Just a simple engraving: respect is not owed by rank. It's owed by presence, earned through conduct, and lost through silence. CSM Elijah Ward General Harlan was there, standing front and center with his arms crossed, expression proud. Reporters asked him if the event from that day still echoed in his mind. His answer was simple. Every time I see someone look past the surface and ask a question instead of making a judgment, I know it worked. Meanwhile, in Arizona, Officer Mills had resigned voluntarily. Not out of shame, but because he said he couldn't unlearn what he saw. He now worked with a nonprofit that focused on training first responders to interact more effectively with veterans and seniors. He even sent another letter to Ward. Asterisk, I thought I wore a badge to enforce the law. I now realize I wear it to serve people. Thank you for waking me up before I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Asterisk Ward never replied in writing. But he kept every letter in a small box near his nightstand. As for the young soldier General Harlan sent to Ward's door, the one who showed up that morning, her name was Lieutenant Cara Mendoza. After a year under Ward's mentorship, she had been promoted and awarded for exemplary leadership in a peacekeeping mission overseas. In her acceptance speech, she said, "Everything I needed to learn about command, I learned from a man who never raised his voice, but never let the truth go unspoken." And somewhere in the back of the room, out of uniform and unnoticed, Sergeant Major Ward sat quietly, arms crossed, smiling. Because sometimes the loudest message is the one delivered in silence, followed by action. Late one fall evening, Sergeant Major Elijah Ward sat on the back porch of his cabin, wrapped in a thick flannel jacket. The sky above him was painted in deep oranges and purples, fading into the dark stillness of a mountain night. He was alone, almost. A pair of headlights cut through the trees. A familiar hum of tires rolled up the gravel path. The same black SUV. It parked gently near the porch, and out stepped General Harlan, now in civilian clothes, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile on his face. Ward didn't stand. He simply gestured to the empty chair beside him. Harlan sat. For a while, neither said a word. Just crickets, rustling leaves, and the crack of firewood inside the stove. Finally, Harlan broke the silence. The story reached the Secretary of Defense. "They want to give you another medal." Ward chuckled, shaking his head. "For what?" "For getting pulled over." "No," Harlan said, his tone softening. "For showing us that the real battlefield isn't always overseas. Sometimes it's in how we treat each other back home." Ward leaned back in his chair. "I didn't need a medal," he said. "I needed them to see. To slow down and see people." The general nodded. "They're seeing now. Mills is leading seminars. Granger's back on the force, quieter, humbler. That young lieutenant you trained? She's rewriting the officer's handbook." Ward didn't answer. He just watched a hawk glide across the twilight sky. After a while, he spoke again. "You know what hurt most that day," he said, eyes still forward. "Wasn't the disrespect. Wasn't even the assumption. It was how routine it felt to them. Like they'd done it before. Like they'd do it again. But they won't," Harlan said. "Not anymore." Ward turned and looked at him, not with anger, but with the heavy wisdom of someone who had lived through too much to be bitter. "I hope you're right." They sat there as the sun disappeared completely, and the stars took over the sky. In the darkness, the two men, soldiers from different paths, understood each other in a way few could. Not through rank. Not through medals. but through the quiet bond of those who carried the weight, and chose not to drop it on the next generation. And that was legacy. Months later, back on Route 89, a small wooden sign quietly appeared near mile marker 117. It wasn't put up by the state, or the county. There was no ribbon cutting, no ceremony. Just a clean, hand-carved plank bolted into the earth with simple black letters, "Here stood a lesson." Seen by many. Understood by a few. Remembered by all. Travelers began to notice it. Truckers slowed down as they passed, tipping their hats out of habit. Local residents started telling the story in diners and barbershops, each version a little different, but always ending with the same line, "You never know who you're stopping, or what they've done for the country." High school civics teachers brought their classes out on field trips. Police cadets were brought to the site for reflection after final exams. One veteran even rode cross-country just to lay a small folded flag at its base. Elijah Ward never admitted to putting the sign there. When asked, he'd smile and say, "Some stories don't need an author. They just need a witness." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Cara Mendoza continued rising fast in the ranks, known not just for her strategy, but for her character. She launched a mentorship program named after Ward, the Elijah Standard, focusing on humility, discernment, and servant leadership. And every year on the anniversary of that roadside stop, a convoy of both military and civilian vehicles made a quiet pilgrimage to the marker. No speeches. No cameras. Just people, standing in silence. Among them was Officer Granger, now retired. He stood further back than most, hat in hand, still carrying the moment like a shadow that never fully left. But maybe that was the point. Not to erase what happened, but to ensure it never happened again. 10 years had passed. The dust on Route 89 still blew the same. The desert wind still howled across the plains. But the people, those who'd heard the story, had changed. At a national leadership summit held in Washington, D.C., one of the keynote speakers was a highly decorated colonel, young, sharp, and charismatic. Her name, Cara Mendoza. As she stepped onto the stage, a photo filled the screen behind her. It wasn't of a battlefield. It wasn't of medals or ceremonies. It was a black and white still from a dashcam. A frail-looking man standing calmly beside an old truck. 2 officers near him. Dust swirling in the air. Tension visible in the still frame. Colonel Mendoza looked out over the audience of lawmakers, military leaders, and police chiefs. This image, she began, was taken 1 hour before everything changed. 1 hour before 2 officers learned a lesson they never forgot. 1 hour before I met the man who taught me everything I know about real leadership. She paused. His name was Command Sergeant Major Elijah Ward. He didn't write books. He didn't chase power. But his silence spoke louder than any speech I could ever give. He reminded us that honor isn't worn, it's lived. The auditorium was silent. Today, she continued, we enforce what we now call the Ward Protocol, a nationwide initiative requiring advanced bias training, veteran engagement standards, and accountability tracking for all field officers. Thousands of people have already benefited from it. All because one man chose grace over rage. After the speech, Cara stepped down from the stage and walked alone into a quiet hallway. Waiting at the end, in a wheelchair, wearing a clean field jacket and a calm expression, was Elijah Ward. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just locked eyes, and she saluted. "You did it," he said simply. "No, sir," she replied. "You did.